Welcome to Governance Minutes, brought to you by the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals, and knowledge partner host, corporate board member.
Welcome to this edition of Governance Minutes. I'm TK Kerstetter with corporate board member, and it's my pleasure to be the guest host today for the show since we're here remotely from the annual conference for the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals. Your usual hosts, Ken and Darla, are very busy hosting breakouts and general sessions, so I'm happy to fill in for them. And I'm especially happy because I have the chance to work with Doug Chia, who is the Assistant General Counsel and Corporate Secretary for Johnson & Johnson. And maybe more importantly, Doug, you are the conference chair for this. So even getting any time from you is probably pretty valuable today.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks, TK.
Well, since you're the chair and since you have all this experience, you have a great deal of respect among your peers here. The first question I have is whenever you have an annual conference like this, there's always something that's the hot topic or the buzz among everybody. So my first question to you, we're halfway into the conference. Sort of what's the buzz? What seems to be the topic that's dominating people's discussion?
I think that, the buzz is that, wow, this conference is really big in that we've packed a lot into it. And we've packed a lot of attendees. We have, if you count the paid attendees, the sponsors, the speakers, etc., we have over 800 people here. That's the biggest conference we've had in a long time. In terms of the substance, we've managed to jam in a lot within, 2.5 short days. And so I think the buzz is just people are amazed by the lineup of speakers that we've been able to bring together. Over 120 speakers. No one is going to get to hear all of them, even though I'm going to try to roam around the whole place. But there's just, there's so many different conference experiences you can have within this one conference. That's really what we intended to create from the beginning.
Well, I know your kickoff speaker was Ralph Whitworth with Relational Investors. No shy person to America's boardrooms, and has to be, again, one of the more well-known activist shareholders. And that's probably very apropos for today's time, knowing the sort of the trend of increase in shareholder power.
Yep.
We're seeing that in the form of shareholder proposals on say and pay. So I guess the question that's very appropriate for Governance Minutes is, how has that shareholder movement and the increase in power affected the corporate secretary's job in the last couple of years?
It's put a lot more time demands on the job, I would say. The corporate secretary's job now is becoming kind of a combination of the traditional corporate secretary in terms of doing board work, general governance work, and securities work. And then also you have a role to play in investor relations. You have a role to play in public relations, government relations. And so all of these things, you're really being put at the crossroads of many decisions at the company that involve parts of the corporate function that the corporate secretary probably didn't have that much interaction with before. All of a sudden they're saying, we need the corporate secretary in this meeting, or you're saying, I need to be in that meeting because I have stakeholders who really care about this issue. I think that's happening more than ever before, and therefore a corporate secretary's calendar can get filled up very quickly with all kinds of after-school assignments, if you will.
So the demands from the board, because here they are now in greater focus.
Yeah.
So they're leaning back on the corporate secretaries to make sure that they have the information they need, that they understand, I'm sure, the issues in case they get caught in that bright light.
Yeah, I think it's the directors, but it's also the management. I think management is realizing that, or having to understand that certain issues actually are corporate governance issues where they might not have thought that before. And your role is to be there to explain why or why not something is a corporate governance issue. So a lot of it is really educating your own colleagues that you work with every day in terms of why is it that the corporate secretary is finding his or her way into so many areas of the corporation.
When you look at all of your constituents that are here,
Yeah.
and one of the things that's happening we've just alluded to, it's sort of the request by shareholders to hear more from committee chairs
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
the board chairs. Risky, or is this going to be a trend that everybody better get prepared for regardless of how risky it is?
I'd say it's the trend for the near future. I'm not sure it's the trend for the long-term future. It seems like there are going to be a lot more requests coming in. I think we've already seen that, and more directors and more boards are going to get kind of used to the idea of, okay, maybe we should try this. Maybe we should do an open meeting or a roadshow where we visit a few key investors and hear what they have to say. But I think that there's great value in that. I think that for corporate secretaries, part of it is validating our own work. Part of it is the directors kind of going to hear for themselves from the shareholders what we've already heard and communicated back. And so it's kind of like, well, you didn't believe it from me, now you're hearing it from them. So now at least, the message is consistent. So in that sense, they can say, okay, well, the corporate secretary is doing this full time. We will trust him or her to continue to do that. And we, the directors, probably don't need to get as directly involved. On the shareholder side, I think you're seeing them getting more requests from companies to come visit them, to talk about corporate governance. And they're having to reevaluate, gee, do we have the kind of personnel and the resources to deal with this, because they're doing their daily analysis on corporate governance issues, on how to vote at annual meetings, in addition having to have this kind of external role. That's a big time commitment from them as well. And so that's why I think over the short term, you're going to see people trying to kind of feel out this new this new normal, but will it actually last? Will people build up permanent structures for that to continue to happen long term? That I'm not sure.
Well, I can't help but imagine that the relationship between the corporate secretary and in the larger companies where there's clearly an investor relations person,
Yep.
that is started, must be a relationship that's very close these days, just on what you're referencing on how much is happening.
It should be. I'm not sure it is at every company. That's part of the strange part about this, is that both in corporations and on the investor side, you have two very different lines of analysis going on. You have on the corporate side the investor relations people really dealing with quarterly earnings, financial statements, and they are talking to people on the investment side who are really kind of the pure financial analysts and research analysts on the industry. The corporate governance people on the corporate side are talking to corporate governance people on the investor side, and within, the two sides, sometimes are very close, sometimes are not. Sometimes the decisions they make really bear no relation to each other, and a lot of times actually that's by design. And so there's a great debate going on right now. There are a number of papers written about, should these two types of, I think one person called it paradigms, should the paradigms really merge together if we're going to truly move forward in terms of doing kind of this integrated analysis of companies by investors and corporations, having this integrated type of communication going out.
While I have you, there's a question, and since we're here at the conference, it's important that we deal with the corporate secretary issues.
Yep.
And one of the issues that I wanted to ask you is, when you look out over the next 18 months,
Yep.
From your experience and who you've talked to here, what do you think are the three biggest challenges that will face corporate secretaries and their departments over the next 18 months?
Well, it's going to really depend on the company, naturally. Different companies are in different situations. Certainly, for a company like J&J that's been around for over 100 years, market cap of $180 billion, that's going to be a lot different than a small and mid-cap company and what they have to face. our shareholder base looks a lot different, is a lot more dispersed than a company that has, some substantial holders of 10 and 20%, maybe a founder who's still around and holds a substantial portion. I think the, triage is going to be a definite issue for corporate secretaries, if it isn't already, in terms of really picking and choosing your battles. But I really think that the primary challenge for the corporate secretary over the coming 12 to 18 months is that process of educating management. I'd say that a lot of boards already understand the issues in corporate governance. They have a pretty good feel for this kind of thing. Many of them had been in positions prior where they saw this, they had an external role. The people inside the company, they're not quite sure why are people asking for additional disclosure and why should we give it to them? If it's not required, what is the advantage? People are always going to find kind of the downside of additional work, additional disclosure. And there you have to play shuttle diplomat. You have to explain to people internally why this is important on the outside, and explain to the people on the outside why disclosure is not just this kind of snap your fingers and numbers appear and we can just disclose whatever we want in whatever form you wanted it. So it's really that playing that shuttle diplomat of trying to explain to the outsiders what the inside view is, to the inside what the outside view is.
Great observation. And Doug Chia, thank you very much for your time.
Thank
Conference Chair. And that will conclude this edition of Governance Minutes. Again, specially brought to you from the annual conference from the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals. And we'll look forward to having you back and our host back for our next edition of Governance Minutes. But thank you for joining us.
Join us again next time for Governance Minutes, brought to you by the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals and Knowledge Partner host, Corporate Board Member.